This happened in 2012, on Mahalaya Amavasya, the same year my grandmother had passed away. And even though my mom told me not to go to work that day and insisted I take leave because it was an important night in our family, I ignored her and left for my noon shift like I always did. I took an auto to the company bus stop around 2:15 in the afternoon, reached the office by 3, and worked my regular shift without thinking about the date or what it meant at home. By the time my shift ended at 1 in the morning, the roads were almost empty, and I put on my headphones and started the 4-kilometer walk back to our house like I had done for months. I reached home around 1:35, called my mom's phone, and she opened the door without saying much while my dad remained asleep upstairs in their room on the first floor. She handed me a glass of hot water, waited until I finished it, and then went back to her room while I climbed the internal staircase to my room on the second floor. I locked my door from the inside, changed my clothes, washed my face, and lay down on my bed with the fan running above me. The next clear moment I remember is my dad shaking my shoulder hard, calling my name in a sharp voice, and telling me to wake up immediately. It was 3:30 in the morning, and I was not in my bed, but sitting upright at the edge of my parents' bed on the first floor with my feet touching the ground. My room door upstairs was unlocked. The staircase light was on, and my dad kept asking how I got there because he had gone to sleep with his bedroom door locked from the inside. I had no answer for him because I had no memory of getting up, unlocking my door, walking down the stairs, and entering their room. My mom stood near the wardrobe looking confused, and she said she heard the staircase creak, but thought it was my dad going to the bathroom. My dad checked the main door and found it still bolted from the inside, which meant no one had entered the house from outside. He walked me back upstairs, showed me my unlocked door, and told me to sleep again because maybe I had walked in my sleep. I had never sleepwalked in my life, not as a child and not as an adult. And I had never left my bed at night without remembering it. I locked my door again, this time checking the latch twice, and lay down while my father returned downstairs and locked his door as well. Around 4:10 in the morning, I heard a loud metallic sound from downstairs, like something heavy falling in the kitchen, and I sat up immediately. I opened my door and saw that the staircase light was still on, and I could hear my mom calling my dad's name in a strained voice. I ran down the stairs and found my father lying on the kitchen floor near the sink, with a steel water pot overturned beside him, and water spreading across the tiles. My mother was trying to lift him by his shoulders, but his body was stiff, and his head had hit the edge of the granite counter. There was a deep cut on the side of his forehead, and blood had mixed with the water on the floor, forming a thin red line toward the drain. I grabbed a towel and pressed it against his head while my mother tried to wake him, but his eyes were open and unfocused. We tried to lift him together, but he was too heavy, and every time we shifted him, his head rolled slightly toward the side. My mother told me he must have woken up to drink water and slipped on the wet floor because the kitchen tap had been left slightly open. I realized then that I had been the last person awake in the house before everything happened, and I was the one who had walked downstairs earlier without remembering it. That's when I thought it was over. I had no idea what was about to happen next. The story isn't over. Subscribe the channel to continue. We managed to move my father to the living room sofa with great difficulty, and my mother kept calling his name while I brought more towels to stop the bleeding from his head. His breathing became uneven and shallow, and his right hand started twitching in small, repeated movements that did not stop. I ran to get my phone from upstairs because I had left it charging in my room. And when I reached my bed, I saw that my bedsheet was crumpled and slightly damp near the edge. I touched it and realized it was water, not sweat. And I remembered the overturned pot in the kitchen. I went back downstairs and saw that the steel pot near the sink was the same one my dad used every night, and it was usually kept full beside the stove. My mother told me she had filled it before sleeping, and the kitchen floor had been completely dry when she went to bed. The tap above the sink was not broken, but it had been turned just enough to let water flow steadily into the pot until it overflowed. I knew my dad never left the tap half open, and my mother was careful about water because the tiles were smooth and slippery. As we tried to keep him awake, he suddenly stopped moving altogether, and his chest rose once before staying still. My mother shook him harder, and I called his name while pressing the towel against his wound. But there was no response. The house was silent, except for the sound of water still dripping from the tap into the sink. My mother collapsed onto the floor beside him, and I stood there holding a blood-soaked towel, staring at the kitchen light reflecting on the wet tiles. When neighbors came after hearing my mother cry out, they helped carry him out, but by then his body was completely unresponsive. The doctor later confirmed that the head injury had caused severe internal bleeding, and the fall had been forceful enough to make survival unlikely. For days, I kept replaying every step of that night, starting from the moment I walked home with my headphones on and ignored my mother's request to stay home. I kept thinking about how I had somehow gone downstairs earlier without memory, how the staircase light had been left on, and how the kitchen tap had been turned just enough to flood the floor. I checked the latch on my door repeatedly over the next weeks, but it never moved on its own again, and I never sleepwalked another night in my life. My mother stopped mentioning Mahalaya Amavasya altogether, and she never again asked me to stay home for any ritual or remembrance. The kitchen tiles were replaced months later because she said she could not look at the faint stain near the drain. Every time I walk down a staircase at night, I hold the railing tightly and look at the floor before taking the next step. I no longer wear headphones while walking home in the dark, and I never leave a tap even slightly open. My father's room on the first floor remains exactly the way he left it that night, with his glasses on the bedside table and his slippers under the bed. I know accidents happen in ordinary houses every day, but I also know that one unlocked door, one turned tap, and one ignored warning can align in a way that destroys a family. I was the last person awake in that house before he fell, and that fact has never changed, no matter how many years pass. I live with the sequence of events exactly as they happened, and there is no missing piece, no mystery left to solve, and no second chance to undo it. One last question. If you were in her place at that moment, would you have done the same? Be honest. What does her choice deserve out of 10? Subscribe now. The best story is coming next.